Okay, let's move on to the main trigger of today's topic, which was this little tweet. Now, the thread itself bothers me to say the least, but to be honest, it's only one of the many times where I felt like I am the minority on taking things like gaming and online journalism seriously. Now, I understand we have all collectively agreed that gaming journalists are a bit of a big fat joke, but that doesn't excuse the way this is stated. And yeah, my biggest thing here is not what's being said, but how. Because while I agree that anybody can write a review in any way they want since it's based on each individual experience we go through the game, and that you don't need to be good at a genre to be able to talk about it, I find this general idea completely messed up if we consider this is a rule for everyone. For example, I recently did a very long podcast talking about my own experiences with Final Fantasy VII Remake, and one of the many mistakes I can admit after rewatching it is that I should have been more experienced in regards to the original, because if you have plenty of free time in your hands and check them out, it's obvious that I don't quite know what I'm talking about in regards to the original Final Fantasy VII. With that in mind, yes, I can do that sort of attitude, but that doesn't make it alright. If it wasn't for my co-host Anthony, who was able to fill the gaps for me, I would consider that podcast a complete disaster for my work because I should not just assume shit that I don't know, especially since I'm supposed to be able to talk about the topic the moment I decided to bring it up. Now, I should mention that this tweet does bring up some proper elements that I think online creators do need to hear in some shape or form, despite being worded in a way that makes me feel like I was slapped by condescendence. I do think this human being did bring up some pretty good points. More specifically, the idea that you need to be good at video games in order to stream or even developing one. Majorly because video games, much like any other form of entertainment, are varied. There's a huge difference between streaming a game you're playing for the very first time and establishing your stream as such, and then saying completionist playthrough flawless victory. By that point, you're asking yourself for trouble, which is why, yeah, do not worry if you don't consider yourself a pro player on any game. You should better focus on creating the environment that's more fitting for your style of streams. Or fuck it, find that style of streaming first. And creative wise, you do not need to be good at playing first person shooters in order to know how to make one. In fact, the ideal thing for certain products is to think outside the box and come up with a new idea so your game can stand out on its own. How can someone who loves Call of Duty can make Fortnite? Both games have different styles and features that make each other unique. With that said, I feel you should focus more, at the very least, on learning about game design, programming, coding, math, and graphic design. And that's just so you can say that you're able to make something. But yeah, none of these things require you to actually make a game by principle. Let's just say that if you had Evil Player on your resume, you're not gonna get hired for the next King of Fighters game, that's all I'm saying here. However, I think everything else stated on these 3 tweets show everything that I hate about the current state of the industry and how some called journalists feel entitled to be respected for doing what's ultimately mediocre work that only fuels the classic quote from consumers, "I could have done it better." Yeah, that phrase can sometimes be more than just some shitposter on Metacritic. A pretty harsh opinion to have, I am aware, but saying that you don't need to be good at a game from a specific genre to become a reviewer, and how you don't have to finish your games either, angers me to my very core as a producer, writer, and creator, and I genuinely feel it's only the gaming side who thinks they deserve that privilege. But let's go piece by piece, shall we? Let's start with the argument that you don't have to finish a video game to write a review about it. Now, while I do feel this is a slap in the face due to how general the statement is, if we go in a more contextualized scenario, I can kind of agree with it as long as the reviewer also knows how to write without making me feel like putting effort into this video is a waste of time of its own. In the section free to play or free to pay, I established the amount of time and progress I made in the game in order to set the ground of my experience and the time I invested while doing the video in the first place. I didn't do that to flex the amount of time I put into video games. I did it because I wanted to contextualize my experience with the game instead of talking like I knew everything about it. After all, a review is an experience, am I right? Now, I understand why this isn't as simple as just finishing the game. Every company works on its own way, and sometimes deadlines can be out of the control of the journalist to the point where they will only have so much time to make their work. If I can make an example here, I'd like to use this quote from Good Vibes Gaming.
So the review embargo for Final Fantasy VII Remake was April 6th. We got the game on April 4th. And that is, so it was originally our intention to have Derek review it. It was just like, hey, you know, this is definitely going to be Derek's game. And I mean, they just didn't give us time. And I don't know if it was lunacy or what it was, but I was like, yeah, I guess I could do it. I could probably beat the game in that amount of time. And I did not sleep. I powered through this whole game in 2 days, basically. And I mean, I don't think I've ever suffered more to make a video than I did for this game. I mean, I sent Derek my draft of the review. I was
I needed to basically rewrite the whole thing.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I had a jumble of thoughts, but I mean, I literally, thinking back on it right now, I can feel my eyes burning. Like, just
I know this quote was a big cause of trouble for those involved, but if you ask me, I'd say this is probably more of a Square Enix issue, since they only got 2 days for the review to be done, which means they had to play the game, record it, make a script, and edit the review in 2 days. That is messed up in a lot of ways, and while big respects for the team for finishing the game in that time, there is an argument to be made on how worth is it to put yourself as a reviewer in that situation just to be able to say you finished the game for the review, which honestly, I would have a hard time saying yes or no. There are games that are just not meant to be played in that form of marathon all the way to the end due to their length, pacing, or structure. Completing Mario 64 doesn't take as much time as it takes to even finish Monster Hunter World without the Iceborne expansion. So in my opinion, it's all a matter of context, something that this thread does not cover, and it states the idea like there's no need to finish any game at all in order to do a so-called work of journalism. And because of that, I will argue that those cases where you don't have to finish a game for the review due to time restrictions should be more of a matter of necessity than using it as an excuse for writers to not be bothered with it. In which the tweet argues that the people against it don't know how the industry works, despite the gaming industry working in ways that make this kind of work pointless, but I'm getting ahead of myself, so I'll explain that later. Now let's move on to one of the biggest debates regarding gaming journalism. Do you need to be good at video games to write a review? To which my answer, as always, is that it depends on the situation and how the review is contextualized. However, I do have one statement to make. Gaming journalists, reviewers, critics, content creators, whatever we wanna call ourselves here, if you don't think you need to be good at a video game in order to write a review, that's fine, I can understand that in a lot of ways. But I do think you need to be a good writer in the first place in order to write a review, because sometimes even that's disappointing. Let me start by saying this. I think we all agree that reviews are overall opinions, and with that comes the sense of subjectivity in the work, meaning that they're only speaking for themselves and shouldn't be anything more than that, right? After all, this person who claims to know the industry more than us mere mortals who went to college and got an education on science and techniques of communication to make this for a living, says that a review is an experience, which yeah, it makes sense. Then why do we still have scores and ratings if it's not supposed to be anything more than subjective work? How is this game is a big piece of garbage an opinion? How is a rating score that judges the quality of a game subjective? How is wait for a price drop an experience? If you haven't noticed by this point, I have been writing this with certain phrases such as, to which my answer is, I think, I will argue, if you ask me, in my opinion. I don't feel the need to use this wording just to calm down the masses from having hot takes on an industry that disappoints me. I do it because I can only speak for myself, something that reviewers, critics, journalists, entitled people, whatever you want to call them, also claim to do when they get called out for what I consider lazy work, except for the fact that they are completely aware that their criticism has an impact because people listen to them. Keep in mind, people like this writer think that it's completely okay to not even be good at a video game in order to say that it's just bad, 3 out of 10, don't buy it. As if it wasn't something posted on a platform that people rely on in order to determine what's worth the time, money, and support. I don't care how you think the industry works or how much you tell me, it's just my opinion. I find that ideology selfish, arrogant, and part of why gaming is taken less seriously than other forms of entertainment. If the people who claim to represent it don't even think competence is a requirement to talk about it, then why should other people? And again, as far as I know, it's not an opinion when your wording is stated as a matter of fact. I didn't enjoy my time with this game is not the same as this is shit and nobody should play it. The second one is not worded as an opinion, it's a statement that's been utilized to determine the fate of plenty of games. And if the industry actually thinks like this, and they do believe that you don't need to be competent as a player, or in my opinion, even as a writer, then how many games or products have been unfairly judged and ended up in obscurity by what I consider an encouraged sense of mediocrity? If you want me to give you a more concrete answer on if I think journalists should be good at video games in order to make reviews of them, I'd say that I don't even want good. I want competence so they can know what to criticize about a video game, since I don't think you should expect an RPG out of an FPS or a platformer. But I think the major problem comes from what I notice it's a common theme in journalism as a whole, which is making articles faster rather than making articles better, which causes me an impression of poor writing, encouraged narcissism, mediocrity, and lack of interest on improving any of the above. You don't need to be good at a certain video game to make a review, because you can easily establish as an author that you're not the target demographic, that you only manage to play a certain amount of the game and word it in a way that can actually reflect the aspect of being an experience, not a statement that determines the fate of a product made by other people. And if you for some reason think that this kind of format makes your reviews less valuable once you aim them more into being opinions, my answer to you on that is good, because people take them way too seriously. And maybe that will make future journalists have a different sense of how to make reviews with a new structure by principle, especially if we still want to avoid criticism from our opinions, since they are that, opinions and nothing more. Because I cannot call 100% wrong the idea that the industry works as this tweet claims, but I will dare to argue that it's a vicious cycle in which the industry doesn't have a higher standard on the competence of its workers, because the workers themselves encourage each other to not be more specialized in what they're talking about. Also, keep in mind that most of this discussion goes towards those that make a career out of this. If you're just doing this kind of project as a hobby, I do encourage you to find your own way of talking about anything you want to, whether as a review, a critique, a journal, anything you want, but do it with the best of your ability and keep learning and improving. And if I came out as condescending or acting like I actually knew better than anybody else in this entire planet, my apologies, not the intention. I simply share my opinions on this matter based on my own experiences. But most importantly, thank you for listening. Oh, right, remember when I mentioned that the gaming industry also works in a way that makes the current way of writing reviews a bit pointless? Yeah, I think we can save that point for later in the show. Trust me, this is way more fitting and less intentional than you might think.